Boss insisted I play nice with his abusive brother. It's family. I secretly recorded their illegal business dealings, reported them, and now they're both behind bars. The first time Davin called me about a job, I thought I was saved. I'd been in and out of work for nearly a year after my last business venture tanked, and he knew I needed a break. Davin had always been the family's golden child, the rags to riches story everyone loved to tell. My mom always said, "Reese, you could learn a thing or two from your cousin." I used to roll my eyes at it, but I never thought badly of him. Family's family, right? I just moved into this dusty, run-down little apartment in Fairhope, Alabama, a last resort before moving back in with my folks. I was living off cereal and cheap microwave meals, pretending I had it together. But when I got Davin's call, it was like a lifeline. He talked big, told me he needed someone he could trust, said he was finally in a position to help me out. And yeah, maybe that should have been my first clue. He invited me to his place, a huge, sprawling house right on the bay with this perfect, manicured lawn and a dock where his boat was tied up like a trophy. He threw a big barbecue that night, with more food than I'd seen in weeks. Beer was flowing, steak sizzling, people laughing. It was like something out of a TV commercial. And he made a big show of introducing me to everyone. I was the cousin, the new guy, the one I can actually count on, he'd say, clapping me on the back like we were brothers. And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I'd barely been there 2 weeks before Davin pulled me into his office. He leaned back in his fancy leather chair, put his boots up on the desk, and looked me dead in the eye. "Reese, my man, we've got big things coming. Bigger than you might realize." I tried to keep my face neutral, but I was hopeful. "I'm ready for it, Davin. You tell me what to do, I'll do it." Davin's eyes sparkled, that charismatic grin spreading across his face. "That's what I like to hear. You're not like these other guys. Family's different. Family's loyal. That's why I'm bringing you into this." Then he leaned in closer, dropping his voice. "Now, listen, there's gonna be some things you see around here. Things that might not make sense at first. Some stuff that's off the books, you get me?" Yeah," I said, even though I didn't. "But what do you mean?" He waved his hand, like it was nothing. "Don't sweat it. Just stick with me, keep your head down, and remember. Blood's thicker than water. We're family, and family doesn't question family." I nodded, thinking I'd stumbled into some exclusive club, something only family could be a part of. Looking back, I wish I'd listened to that instinct in my gut, that little voice that whispered something wasn't right. But Davin had a way of making you feel like you were the one missing out if you didn't jump on board. Then, Giles showed up. Davin never really talked about Giles before. He was that troubled brother everyone had an opinion about but no one knew well. He had a reputation in the family for having a temper, and word was he'd been in and out of trouble with the law. But I figured, hey, everyone deserves a second chance. And Davin made it clear this was his way of helping Giles get back on his feet. "Reese, meet Giles," Davin said, one hand on Giles's shoulder as if he was trying to hold him down. Giles barely looked at me, just gave this cold, hard stare. His grip when we shook hands was tight, almost too tight, like he wanted to make sure I knew who was boss. "So, you're the new kid Davin's been talking about," Giles said, voice low and gravelly. "Hope you're tougher than you look." I tried to laugh it off, brushing it aside as just some macho posturing. "I'll try not to disappoint," I said, trying to keep things light. But Giles didn't laugh, he just kept looking at me, his eyes never leaving mine, like he was sizing me up. Later, Davin pulled me aside. "Look, Reese, Giles can be intense. But he's family. We look out for him, all right? He's just had a rough time. You understand?" "Yeah, I get it," I said, trying to hide the unease in my voice. The first couple of weeks, Giles was just kind of there. He'd show up at random times, watching me, making comments under his breath about the work I was doing. He'd laugh at me if I struggled with something, mutter things like, "City boy can't handle a hammer," or "Davin's baby cousin needs a hand." I let it roll off my back, thinking he was just testing me. But then he started getting more aggressive. One evening, when we were the last ones at the site, Giles cornered me by my truck. He got up close, his breath stinking of cigarettes and cheap beer. "Davin's been too soft on you, Reese," he said, voice low. "Thinks you're some golden boy just 'cause you're family. But family doesn't mean jack if you're dead weight." "Look, I'm just trying to do my job," I said, trying to keep my cool. "That's the problem," he sneered. "Your job isn't just this hammer and nails bull. There's more going on here, things Davin needs you to handle." "What kind of things?" His grin widened, showing off a gold tooth. "Stuff you don't ask questions about." Then he leaned in closer, so close I could feel his stubble scratch against my face. "And you don't want to disappoint family, do you?" The way he said it wasn't a question. It was a threat. And that was the first time I realized I might be in over my head. After that, Giles was always around. He'd drop by at odd hours, sometimes early in the morning before anyone else showed up, or late at night when we were closing up. And he started giving me tasks. Weird ones. Like taking materials to certain places at strange times or signing off on documents without Davin around. When I asked Davin about it, he just waved it off. Giles has his own way of doing things, Davin said, almost dismissively. You know how he is. But the way he said it didn't sit right with me. I started noticing things, materials disappearing, invoices that didn't add up, clients that would mysteriously back out at the last minute. And every time I'd ask Davin, he'd just tell me, don't worry about it, Reese. It's family business. Keep your head down and don't ask too many questions. Then one day, Giles caught me looking at one of those invoices a little too closely. He slammed his hand down on the desk, making me jump. What the hell do you think you're doing? He hissed, his face inches from mine. Just checking the numbers, I stammered. He gave a laugh that had no humor in it. The numbers? Look at you, the accountant. Let me tell you something, Reese. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. You don't look at numbers that aren't yours. You just do what you're told. Got it? I nodded, feeling the blood drain from my face. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going back to all those strange deliveries, all the whispers, all the veiled threats from Giles. I realized I was stuck. If I stayed, I'd be complicit in whatever mess they were tangled up in. But if I tried to leave, there was no telling what Giles would do. Or Davin, for that matter. The next morning, I went into Davin's office, planning to confront him, to tell him I wanted out. But before I could say a word, he looked up at me, all friendly and smiling. Reese, my man. Just the guy I was looking for, he said, waving me in. I've got a special job for you. And that's when he told me I'd be working with Giles on some after-hours projects, hauling unregistered materials to a client a few towns over. When I hesitated, he raised an eyebrow. Problem with that, Reese? I opened my mouth to say something, but then I saw the look in his eyes. That same cold, calculating glint I'd seen in Giles's. That was when it hit me. Whatever this was, Davin was in it just as deep as Giles, and I was the only idiot who thought we were just doing honest work. I nodded, forcing a smile. No problem, Davin. Family, right? Exactly, he said, clapping me on the back. Family. I walked out of there, my heart pounding in my chest. If family was supposed to mean something, then this wasn't family. This was a trap, and I was the one caught in it. And that's when I knew, if I was going to get out of this, I'd have to take them down before they took me down first. After that day, things moved fast. Davin and Giles didn't waste time. I became their lackey, their errand boy, forced to move boxes late at night, sign papers that didn't make sense, and make deliveries to shady addresses in rundown neighborhoods. Every time I tried to get details, Giles would sneer, "You don't need to know, Reese. Just shut up and do what you're told." I felt trapped, but every night I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, planning my way out. Davin had me cornered, but he didn't know me as well as he thought. My mom always told me, "Reese, you've got a mind like a steel trap," and I intended to use it. I started small, keeping notes on everything. Every strange delivery, every suspicious document, every whispered threat from Giles, I wrote it all down. Then I took it a step further. I downloaded a voice recorder app on my phone, something discreet. Each time Giles or Davin let something slip, I recorded it. I'd slide my phone under my desk or keep it in my jacket pocket, capturing every word. They had no idea. One night, Giles went on a rant after too many beers, complaining about how Davin never paid him enough, how he was the real brains behind the operation, how he handled all the dirty work. He bragged about bribes to inspectors, about how they skimmed from big contracts. I just nodded and played along, hoping he'd keep talking. By the end of the night, I had enough recordings to make their lives very uncomfortable. The real breakthrough came a few weeks later. Davin was out of town for the weekend, so Giles was running the show alone. He got sloppy, maybe because he thought he didn't have to impress Davin. He showed me an old, beat-up notebook he called the Bible, full of names, dates, transactions, and addresses. It was everything, every deal, every bribe, every under-the-table scheme they'd ever pulled. And he left it in the truck's glove compartment while we were on a late-night run. As soon as Giles stepped out to handle the delivery, I snatched my chance. I pulled out my phone, took pictures of every single page of that notebook as fast as I could. My hands were shaking, heart pounding, but I got it all. When Giles came back, I acted like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just sealed his fate. After that, I knew I had enough to take them down, but I wasn't stupid. Davin had connections, and I wasn't sure how far they went. I needed to be smart, to keep everything airtight. I went to the one person I could trust, my old friend Kelsey. She was still in Fairhope, working as a paralegal, and had always been the smartest person I knew. When I showed her the recordings and the photos of the notebook, her eyes widened. "Reese, this is huge. They're into some serious, federal-level stuff here. I know, I said, feeling a mix of relief and fear. But I need your help. I don't know how to do this right. She nodded, face serious. We're going to do this by the book. No shortcuts, you do exactly what I say, and we'll make sure they can't touch you. The next morning, Kelsey helped me draft a report with everything I had. She took it to a friend of hers who worked in federal law enforcement, someone she trusted to handle it quietly. I handed over every recording, every photo, and my written notes. I was nervous as hell, but Kelsey reassured me, they've got enough here to bury these guys. After that, all I could do was wait. I still had to go to work, still had to face Davin and Giles every day like nothing was happening. It was torture, wondering if they'd figured me out, if they'd realized the walls were closing in on them. But I kept my head down, and I kept my cool. Then, one Monday morning, the raid happened. I was on site when it all went down. Black SUVs pulled up, federal agents spilling out, shouting Davin's name, barking orders for everyone to stand back. Giles tried to run, but they had him pinned down in seconds. Davin stood there, looking stunned, like he couldn't believe it was happening. He glanced around, probably hoping someone would save him. But no one did. I watched from the edge of the site, heart pounding with a mix of fear and satisfaction. I could see Davin's eyes scanning the crowd, searching faces until he found mine. He looked at me, confusion shifting into something darker as he realized. He knew it was me. I could see the anger in his face, the way he gritted his teeth as they slapped handcuffs on him. But he didn't say a word. After they took him and Giles away, the crew started whispering, everyone piecing together the story. I heard someone say, looks like they were skimming for years. Dirty money. Bribes. They're finished. And I just stood there, letting it sink in. That evening, as I was packing up to leave, one of Davin's old foremen, a grizzled guy named Hank, came up to me. Hey, Reese, he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. You did good, might have been family, but you did what had to be done. I nodded, a strange feeling welling up in my chest. Yeah. I guess I did. I moved out of Fairhope not long after that. Took a job in Chattanooga, left all the mess and the memories behind. I still keep in touch with Kelsey. She calls sometimes, telling me how Davin's trial is going. They've got him and Giles on fraud, money laundering, and enough charges to keep them locked up for a long time. Turns out, they'd scammed plenty of people over the years, and I was the one who brought them down. Sometimes, I think about Davin and the way he looked at me that day. The betrayal in his eyes, like I was the one who'd crossed a line. But then I remember everything he did, every threat, every manipulation, every time he used family as a weapon to keep me in line. And I feel free. In the end, I didn't need to forgive him. I just needed to get out, to be rid of him, to prove to myself that I was better than the mess he dragged me into. As for Davin and Giles? They're exactly where they deserve to be.